You have a fruit tree that has been standing in your yard for years. Every spring it sprouts leaves, looks perfectly healthy, and grows larger with each passing season, but it produces absolutely nothing. No flowers, no fruit, just an abundance of leaves. You've watered it, fertilized it, pruned it, talked to it, and maybe even threatened it. Nothing works. Now imagine someone hands you a nail, just an ordinary nail, and they tell you to hammer it into the tree trunk. Your first instinct would be to think this person is crazy. Intentionally wounding a living tree? That sounds more like an expression of frustration than gardening. But here is what no gardening magazine, no fertilizer label, and no agrochemical sponsored advice column will tell you. That nail might actually be the only thing that works. Not because of magic, but because of biology. Somewhere inside that tree is a survival switch, and that switch has been waiting for a signal that only stress can send. This technique has a name. It has a history that dates back centuries across Japan, China, and the Mediterranean. It also has peer-reviewed scientific backing, and it only costs the price of a single nail in about 30 seconds of your time. Compare that to the $40, $60, or sometimes $120 bottles of specialized bloom boosters that the $8 billion plant nutrition industry desperately wants you to keep buying. Before this video ends, you will understand exactly why your tree refuses to bear fruit, what that nail actually triggers inside the tree's vascular system, and how to perform this correctly to stimulate reproduction without killing the tree. Stick with me because the science in the next section will completely change the way you think about every plant you have ever grown. Let's talk about who benefits from you not knowing this. According to Grandview Research, the global plant growth regulator market, the industry that sells bloom boosters, fruit promoters, hormone sprays, and flowering enhancement fertilizers, was valued at $8.1 billion in 2023. It is projected to reach $13.32 billion by 2030. This is not a niche market. This is a systematically built dependency, and you are the target customer. Every year, home gardeners and small orchard farmers pour money into products with names like Fruitfall, Bloom Booster Pro, or Flower Force. These products contain synthetic auxins, cytokinins, and gibberellins, which are lab-manufactured versions of the exact hormones your tree produces on its own when it feels threatened. Read that again. They are selling you a synthetic copy of what your tree makes for free the moment it thinks its survival is at stake. The comparison is almost insulting. A 220 milliliter bottle of commercial bloom booster sells for between $35 and $80 at most garden centers. A box of galvanized steel nails is under $2. One nail is all it takes. The active mechanism isn't in the bottle. It's inside the tree, waiting to be unlocked by the right biological trigger. Now, to be fair, and this is important, commercial plant hormones have legitimate applications. In massive commercial orchards managing dozens of varieties across hundreds of acres, precise hormone application gives growers a level of control that a nail simply cannot provide. This technique is not a universal replacement for every situation. There are tree species, soil conditions, and growth stages where mechanical stress intervention is inappropriate or ineffective, and we will address those exact limitations before this video ends. But for the average person with one stubborn fruit tree in their backyard, an $8.1 billion industry has very little interest in telling you that the answer might already be in your toolbox. The question is, where did this knowledge come from, who used it first, and why did it almost completely disappear? The answer goes back much further than you might think. This isn't some gardening hack someone invented on the internet. This is ancient knowledge that survived for centuries before being quietly buried. The earliest recorded mention of intentional mechanical stress on fruit trees appears in Roman agricultural literature. Writing around 60 AD in De Rea Rustica, one of the most comprehensive agricultural manuals of the ancient world, Columella described the practice of wounding unproductive trees to force fruit production. He wrote about farmers driving copper tools into the bark of stubborn fig or olive trees, not out of desperation, but as a calculated, understood technique passed down through generations of Roman horticulture. This wasn't superstition. These were real farmers documenting what produced reliable results. The same principle emerged independently across East Asia. In traditional Japanese fruit cultivation, A practice called kankoku involved inflicting controlled wounds on the trunk tissue of trees that had grown overly vegetative, meaning trees that kept pushing energy into wood and leaf growth rather than reproduction. Song Dynasty Chinese agricultural manuscripts from roughly 960 to 1279 AD mentions scoring and piercing the bark of fruit trees to rebalance the tree's vigor, a concept expressed in the language of traditional medicine, but describing a biological reality that modern plant physiology has confirmed down to precise molecular details. For nearly 2,000 years, this knowledge remained in the hands of farmers. Rooted in practical tradition rather than academic literature, it was passed down from father to son, from village elder to apprentice. There was no need for a laboratory to verify it because the orchards themselves were the proof. Then came the mid-20th century. Between 1950 and 1970, the global agrochemical industry exploded, driven by post-war synthetic chemistry. Hormone-based agricultural products flooded the market. Extension services funded by chemical companies promoted spray-based solutions. Traditional mechanical techniques weren't disproven, they simply stopped being mentioned. The economic incentive to teach a farmer to use a nail instead of a bottle was exactly zero. The knowledge didn't die, it just stopped being taught. And that makes all the difference. Because what is forgotten can still be recovered. And the science explaining why it works is far more fascinating than anyone in an $8.1 billion industry wants you to sit down and actually read. It explains exactly what happens inside your tree the moment that nail pierces the bark, and why it triggers one of the most powerful biological responses in the plant kingdom. Your fruit tree has two main vascular systems running through its trunk. The first is the xylem, which transports water and dissolved minerals upward from the roots. The second is the phloem, located in a thin but crucial layer just beneath the bark. The phloem is the tree's nutrient highway. It moves sugars, amino acids, and signaling compounds produced in the leaves downward throughout the plant. When you drive a nail into the trunk, you create a localized disruption in this phloem layer. Not a severing, not a destruction, a disruption. And that makes all the difference. The moment the phloem tissue is damaged, the tree's signaling cascade begins within minutes. The first responders are a class of plant hormones called jasminates, specifically jasmonic acid and its active form, jasmonyl isoleucine. Research published in the journal Plant, Cell, and Environment documented that jasmonate synthesis begins within 30 to 60 minutes after mechanical wounding in woody plants. Jasmonates are the tree's internal alarm system. Their primary function is stress regulation. They travel through the vascular tissue and begin reallocating the tree's metabolic priorities from vegetative growth to reproductive output. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable biochemistry. According to stress-induced flowering studies reviewed by the American Society for Horticultural Science, mechanically stressed trees show a statistically significant increase in endogenous ethylene production within 24 hours of the wounding event. In this context, ethylene acts as a secondary messenger that directly promotes floral initiation, the biological process of converting vegetative shoots into flower buds. The tree isn't confused. It is executing a genetically programmed survival protocol refined by millions of years of evolution. When an organism detects structural damage that threatens its continuity, it accelerates reproduction before the threat worsens. The underlying logic is brutally elegant. A tree that thinks it might die has one biological imperative: produce seeds before it perishes. Flowers become fruit. Fruit contains seeds. Seeds carry on the genetic legacy. The nail isn't tricking the tree into doing something unnatural. It is activating a pathway that was always there, waiting for the right signal. You aren't forcing the tree. You are speaking to it in the language of survival pressure, the only language its nervous system understands. There is a secondary mechanism worth understanding. When the phloem flow is partially obstructed at the wound site, the sugars produced in the canopy cannot flow freely downward and begin to accumulate above the point of disruption. This localized sugar accumulation is itself a flowering trigger. A 2018 study published by Wageningen University in the Netherlands demonstrated that elevated soluble sugar concentrations in shoot tissues directly upregulate the expression of phloragen, specifically the FT protein, which is the primary mobile flowering signal in most angiosperm species. including all common temperate fruit trees. Simply put, the nail creates a sugar traffic jam, and that sugar buildup chemically tells the tree it is time to bloom. Two independent mechanisms, the jasminate stress cascade and the sugar accumulation pathway, converge on the exact same biological outcome, floral initiation in a stubbornly vegetative tree. This is exactly why farmers across multiple continents independently arrived at the same technique over 2,000 years without ever speaking to one another. The biology was always consistent. Only the explanation was missing. And the explanation you are about to see comes with specific conditions. This technique has practical limitations, and understanding those limitations is what separates someone who uses this technique correctly from someone who tries it and kills their tree. Before you pick up a hammer, there is something this video needs to tell you. It's the part that most forbidden knowledge content intentionally skips because it makes the technique sound less miraculous than the thumbnail promised. This method has limits, real, practical limits. Mechanical stress induction works most reliably on temperate stone and palm fruits, apples, pears, quinces, plums, cherries, and peaches. These species possess deeply conserved jasmina stress flowering pathways that respond predictably to phloem disruption. A 2021 meta-analysis published in Horticulture reviewing stress-induced flowering across 44 woody fruit species found a statistically significant flowering response in 78% of the temperate tree species tested, but only 41% of tropical and subtropical species showed consistent results under the same mechanical stress conditions. If you are dealing with mangoes, avocados, or citrus, the nail technique is far less reliable and potentially more harmful because these species have different vascular structures and hormonal flowering trigger mechanisms that respond better to temperature differentials and photoperiod manipulation rather than mechanical wounding. There are also incredibly important age and health considerations. This technique is designed for mature, healthy trees that are overly vegetative, meaning trees that have reached reproductive maturity and are growing vigorously but refuse to bloom. According to orchard management guidelines from the University of Minnesota Extension Service, most apple varieties reach reproductive maturity between 3 and 8 years after grafting. If your tree is young, recently transplanted, diseased, or already suffering from drought or nutritional stress, adding mechanical damage will not activate a survival reproduction response. It will compound the existing stress and open an infection pathway that could damage or kill the tree. A wounded tree that is already struggling is not a tree that blooms, it is a tree that dies. This is exactly what the $1332 billion industry understands, even if their motives are commercial rather than educational. Stressed trees require careful management, and intervention without diagnosis is like gambling with a living organism. Therefore, the identity shift this requires is as follows. You are not an applier of a technique. You are first a reader of the tree. You observe whether the growth is vigorous and vegetative dominant. You confirm that the tree has reached reproductive maturity. You assess whether it is healthy enough to process a wound as a signal rather than a threat. This shift in how you view yourself, from an applier to a diagnostician, is what separates those who get fruit from those who get frustration. Once you have confirmed your tree is a suitable candidate, the execution is simple, precise, and literally takes less than 2 minutes. And that is exactly what comes next. This is where 2,000 years of accumulated knowledge becomes something you can do this weekend. Timing is the first variable, and it is non-negotiable. This intervention must be performed in late winter to early spring, about 2 to 4 weeks before the tree's normal bud break, the point when dormant buds begin to swell but have not yet opened. In most temperate northern hemisphere climates, this window falls between late February and early April, depending on the specific variety and local conditions. The University of California Cooperative Extension Orchard Management Calendar identifies this pre-bud break window as the period of highest hormonal sensitivity in deciduous fruit trees. This means the jasminate and ethylene cascade you trigger will have maximum impact on whether developing buds differentiate into flower buds or continue as vegetative shoots. The nail itself is more important than most people think. Use a clean, bright steel or galvanized nail, roughly a 10-gauge construction nail, between 60 mm and 80 mm in length. Completely sterilize the nail before it touches the tree. Wipe it down with 70% isopropyl alcohol and let it air dry for 2 minutes. This step is not optional. An unsterilized nail introduces fungal spores and bacterial pathogens directly into living vascular tissue, and fire blight, caused by Erwinia amylivora, alone can devastate an apple or pear tree in a single season. 30 seconds of sterilization protects years of growth. Select an insertion point on the main trunk or a primary scaffold branch about 30 to 45 cm above the soil line. Avoid existing wounds, pruning scars, or discolored tissue. Drive the nail at a slight downward angle, about 15 degrees below horizontal, to a depth of roughly 2/3 the length of the nail. You are aiming for the phloem layer just beneath the bark, not piercing entirely through the trunk. For trunks under 15 and under 1 hours in diameter, one nail is sufficient. For larger, well-established trunks over 20 cm in diameter, driving 2 nails on opposite sides of the trunk, spaced 10 cm apart vertically, creates a more complete phloem disruption without overstressing the tree. Leave the nail in. Do not remove it. The tree will begin to compartmentalize the wound within days through a process called CODIT, compartmentalization of decay in trees, first described by plant pathologist Dr. Alex Shigo in the 1970s. And the continuous mild disruption maintains the hormonal signal during the critical floral initiation period. Within 3 to 6 weeks after bud break, you should see a measurable difference in bud development. In a single full growing season, a tree that produced nothing but leaves for years will show you what it was always capable of doing. You have just learned what a multi-billion-dollar industry has spent decades trying to keep buried in old Latin agricultural texts and forgotten Japanese fruit cultivation traditions. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is free. One nail, 2 minutes of your time, and the activation of a biological pathway that evolution has spent millions of years building into every fruit tree on this planet. That is exactly what they don't want you to know. Because every fruit tree you fix with a nail is one less customer buying a $60 bottle of synthetic hormones in a $13-32 billion market that relies entirely on your dependency. So if this video reached you, don't stop here. Share it with one person who has a stubborn fruit tree doing nothing in their yard. Not because you want to help this channel, but because spreading this information is a small act of rebellion against an industry that profits by keeping growers dependent, confused, and opening their wallets instead of their toolboxes. Subscribe not as a gesture of support, but as a commitment to keep receiving knowledge that was never supposed to reach you this easily. And in the next video, we go deeper. There is another technique, even older than this one, that Japanese farmers used to double fruit size without a single gram of fertilizer. The industry really doesn't want you to see it. If this story has changed the way you look at the trees in your yard, please subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Let's cultivate the future together. The next treasure trove of knowledge will be revealed soon.